Cities Network, and we are co-convening this session with our partners from the World Bank. This is a practitioner dialogue that couldn't be more timely. Tonight we'll be talking about inclusive approaches for tackling COVID-19 in informal settlements. And it's one of these moments where we're talking about problems that are not easily solved. And while it's very catchy to say that we'll be able to switch on our economies and return to normal, for some people, the lights have been flickering for some time. And as a network focusing on holistic urban resilience, we're often talking about systemic issues that require systemic solutions. And tonight we're going to hear from some practitioners on the front line who are, with lessons from past crises, responding with solutions, but they're still working on it. So we also just want to remind everyone of the nature of this dialogue before I hand over the microphone to Francis to introduce our speakers for this evening. As a practitioners dialogue, we convene this space to have open learning conversations. These conversations are not on the record, and while they are open, we ask that if any media are on the line or if anyone wishes to publish what they hear tonight, they reach out to us and we will get the confirmation from the speakers that that's okay. And just before I hand over the microphone, the last thing I will say is that this is an issue that many are working on and aligns very much with the work that UN Habitat and many of our partners at GRCN are doing. And we're looking forward to hearing tonight from the speakers on the line, but we're also very much looking forward to continuing to partner with the World Bank and with others to address this issue in subsequent sessions and work. And with that, Francis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. My name is Francis Guesquière. So my role is to welcome you on behalf of the World Bank City Resilience Program and introduce today's speaker. We'll have 3 speakers. I'm actually delighted that Mohammed Zanna just popped up. We had issues with the connection. As you can imagine, it's not always easy to connect with some of the countries that are joining us. Mohammed Zanna is popularly known as the Vagabond King. He's a community organizer, an activist, a leader of the Nigerian Slum and Informal Settlement Federation, and he's also affiliated with Slum Dwellers International. We'll then have Julian Baskin, who works for Cities Alliance. He's a town planner with focus on participatory planning and slum upgrading and affordable housing. And finally, we'll have Farouk Braimah, who's the executive director of People's Dialogue and Human Settlement in Ghana. He also serves as a deputy chair of Slum Dwellers International's board. Mohammed will give us a first-hand account. I believe his presentation, by the way, his presentation will be without slides. We understand that we're all very busy, but I think Mohammed more than some of us, and so didn't have a slide. I believe his presentation will be quite sobering and provocative. Julian will then give us a bit more of context on informal settlement, drawing from lessons learned from the Ebola crisis. And then finally, Farouk will wrap up with a bit more of a message of hope, talking about successes and opportunities from his work in the informal settlement in Accra. We'll then open for Q&A, and as Lauren said, please ask your question in the question section of Zoom, not in the chat section. And then we'll group these questions and then ask them to our speakers. Mohammed, Julian, and Farouk, welcome and thank you for accepting to be with us today. We can imagine how busy you are, and we're really grateful for you accepting to join us. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the screen to Mohammed, who's going to talk for about 10 minutes about his direct experience working in the slum. Mohammed, welcome, and the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having me on this program. I really appreciate it. Yeah, My name is Comrade Mohammed, as everybody heard, a member of the Nigerian Slum/Informal Settlement Federation, which is a grassroots movement of urban poor people living in slums for our dignity and development. Right now, I am here in Lagos, which is one of the most populated cities in Nigeria, with over 22 million people. And almost 2/3 of them live in slum areas and also survive on the informal economy, which provides over 80% of the state's internally generated revenue. And most of us live on what we earn every day. And with this lockdown, things are not easy. Tension is too high out there. There is every possibility of total breakdown of law and order as a result of the lockdown without providing any soft landing for the larger majority of people that live in the city. As we speak, tension is high. The governor has called in the military, the police to maintain security, but it's not enough. It is not about bringing the soldiers or bringing police or anybody, but it's about providing an alternative, a soft landing for the people while they stay at home to stop the spread of this deadly virus. There has to be some food, there has to be some water. And social distancing is not possible in these our slum communities. You see thousands of people living in a very small square meter of land. 10 to 20 people living in a single house. How do you expect social distancing? How do we practice social distancing in our slum communities? So honestly, we in the Nigerian Slum and Informal Federation, we are seriously overwhelmed by the sheer nature of the disaster that is unfolding before us. And it is a ticking time bomb. Unless something is done, we have a serious problem. Now, if you go to all the communities, everywhere, people have turned to beggars. People are begging on the street. How do you stay at home with an empty stomach? It's not possible. So people are taking their chances to go out. Even as we speak, people are out there. Commuters, transporters, all who used to be an informal, which is an informal sector, they all survive on what they beg every day. So I'm really scared, really scared. Scared not just for the virus, but scared for the total breakdown of law and order in Lagos State and in Nigeria by contrast. I just can't imagine what we are going through right now. I can't imagine what we are going through. Nobody can imagine it. People are suffering. The government is not doing anything. We hear the Lagos State government is providing food for 200,000 people in a state of 22 million people, and over half of 2/3 of that are in the informal sector. They all need help. Just imagine we took relief material for people with disability, but everybody's are fighting it. What is meant for people with disability? They have forgotten the situation they are in, the condition they are in. They are thinking of themselves, not the vulnerable people. These are the most vulnerable of the society. These are the same people that normally give handout to these same people. But now they are fighting over the same handout. We are doing our best as a federation, as an affiliate of SDI International, doing our best, creating awareness, creating face masks, sharing it to the communities, sourcing food donation from people that have it, and sharing it around to the communities, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Even from our side, it's not enough. Government need to do more. The government is not doing nothing. All we hear is on the news. And when they come out and share what they give a person, it's not enough for him and his family to eat, even for just one meal, just for one meal. It's not enough. We are caught up in between coronavirus and hunger. If we stay home, we die of hunger. If we go outside, we stand the risk of catching the coronavirus and spreading it to our families and probably to our communities. These are the situation. There is tension, serious tension here. And it's a ticking time bomb. Something needs to be done. If nothing is done, we will be faced with much difficult situation, a serious humanitarian crisis. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know what next tomorrow will bring. I don't know what the next, now we have a 2 weeks extension of the lockdown. And God knows that 2 weeks is not going to be the last of it. It is everywhere where they have much better system to manage this crisis. It has took them months and they're still on it. We don't have any of those things. Nor are the hospitals, nor are the respiratory ventilators, nor are the necessary medical medicine that is needed to treat people that are infected. We don't have any of those things. We don't have any functioning health centers in our community. We don't have them. Even before even before the coronavirus crisis came to be, we don't have hospital. When people get sick, we depend on quack doctors. We depend on people selling medicine on the street that are exposed to extreme heat. These are what we use to cure ourselves when we get sick. And now this. I'm really scared for what the future holds for us. I don't know. I don't know where we will be maybe by next week or by next 2 weeks. I don't know where we will be. I don't know. And it is very important that something is done as a matter of urgency so that we can all be alive when the storm is over. Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mohammed. Thank you very much. I think that your testimony is loud and clear. I think everybody here is hearing it, and hopefully some of us can help. We'll now pass on to Julian. Mohammed, please stay with us. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. And Mohammed, I think the screen is yours. Oh, okay. Dorian, I'm sorry. Dorian.
I think Julian, if you can unmute, then we'll start with your presentation. And thank you again, Mohammed.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well,
please.
Well, after
please
that very, very powerful statement about the reality on the ground, it's a very hard statement to follow. But I think the point is that we are where we are, and we need to respond in the immediate short term. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's a great privilege to speak to such a large audience about this absolutely urgent matter. I just want to state up front that I'm not a health practitioner in any way, so I'm not going to question the advice of global health experts. But what I am going to do is put forward some ideas as to what the immediate short-term actions might be. The fact that most African urban residents cannot simply retreat and isolate to homes with running water, sanitation, and energy is a function of decades of weak governance and global inequality. But we are where we are, and we must respond to the immediate short term. But when the dust settles, we need to spur a real global movement in response to make sure that next time there's a crisis, African cities are in a better position to respond. Now, on the screen in front of you, I hope you can all see my screen, I have a picture of a marketplace and food. And this picture really is about two things. The first thing is when we talk about informality, we're talking both about where people live and where people work. And perhaps the biggest part of the informal economy is about feeding people. It's where people buy their food. And the question of food is the critical issue to be solved if any strategy is to work. In much of the world, we talk about the need for cash transfers, but there already is an economic crisis, and we'll discuss that just now. But what makes this unbearable is the doubt about how are you going to feed your family. And everyone knows that ultimately social fabric breaks down when someone goes to the shop and can no longer buy a loaf of bread. Sorry, I just want to. So I'm just getting my. Okay. Oh, there you go. Sorry, my slides weren't changing, so now they are. So in front of you, you have a picture of West Point in Monrovia, Liberia. It's a settlement of some 80,000 people. If you look at it from an aerial photograph, you cannot see the ground. The open space that you see is a function of sea level rise. The width of the beach is also a function of sea level rise. Those shacks have been destroyed. The pictures on the left are not about Monrovia, but they're about general issues. Within that settlement, there is no running water. There is no sanitation. The communities host some of the most vulnerable people. And above all, we mustn't forget that people do not have energy. They cannot store things in their homes. They rely almost exclusively on charcoal and wood to cook. They are not buying processed foods from the shops. They are buying food that needs to be cooked. And if you do not have a supply of energy into the settlements, you are not able to prepare your daily meal. Now, when we talk about informal, I don't know why we do talk about informal, because it's actually the majority of people who live in informal settlements in African cities. More than 60% of African urban residents live in informal settlements or slums. Whilst over 60% of people find their work in the informal economy, today, if you're looking for a job, 93% of job seekers will find work in the formal economy. Whereas in many parts of Europe and in the United States, where we have a similar crisis, they talk about a health crisis and an economic crisis. So the health crisis is spurring an economic crisis. Here we really have an economic crisis onto which a health problem is being imposed. So it's a different way around, but a very important point. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of what we're dealing with here, I have a slide of Nampula, Mozambique. It's a city that grows at 5.7% annum, which means it doubles in size every 12 years. And what the slide shows you is by far the majority of urban growth is informal, by far. And it just gives you a spatial representation of that. So we are really not talking about a response to informal settlements. We're talking about a response to African cities. It really has to be seen in its broader context. This slide really is a slide to say that it superimposes two sets of satellite imagery, one taken in 2015, the other one in 2007. And what it shows is that African cities generally expand and sprawl in the first instance, and then over time densify. And what it really means is that in the process of sprawl, people create fairly large pieces of land, they leapfrog pieces of land that are too complex to gain possession of, etc. But what it means is that there is always land to be found if needed. This idea that there is no land is a myth. Very seldom in any African city is there genuinely no land. Normally, it's a question of how do you gain access to the land, and there are a myriad reasons why that land cannot be used, which forces people into, often when they're identifying, into the worst possible land. And you would have noticed that the settlement in Monrovia is on a sandbank, to give an example of that. Now, in Liberia, this is their second shot in a very short time dealing with a deadly virus. And it's important that we just outline some of the lessons from Ebola. And I think what Mohammed said is a fundamental lesson. The police and the military are simply not going to make this work. You can't force people into compliance if they feel hungry and if they really do not know how to comply. So the first lesson that comes out of the Ebola crisis is that Ebola started to be defeated when the communities took ownership. When it shifted from the police and the military to the communities is when the Ebola crisis started to be defeated. That's a fundamental point to realize in whatever strategies we unfold. The second point is that the faith-based groups were vital in fighting misinformation during the Ebola epidemic. We have to involve a broad constituency of people into this. The third lesson was that in the midst of so much rumor and misinformation, question and answer sessions with officials and experts worked well to address misinformation and assured people were accurately informed. People are willing to listen to people who are informed, and we need to give them access to those people. And next lesson is that upward communication about Ebola, in other words, knowledge from the ground, was shared by community activists, and that information led to appropriate responses in terms of treating and the reduction of risk of transmission. So there was a relationship between the community and the authorities, and the information came from the ground. And then finally, quarantines work better when managed by communities and not externally through coercion. It's a fundamental lesson from the Ebola crisis. So with those lessons in mind, I make the following suggestions as to what needs to be done. And the very first thing that needs to be done in every single city in every country in Africa, we need to establish dialogue structures. We need to have immediate structures that link settlements to cities to national government. And in some places in Africa, and I'm sure Farouk can talk about Ghana and the examples in Liberia, in fact, and the examples in Uganda and other places, every single informal settlement has a settlement forum. Those settlement forums are linked to municipal forums. But these structures have to be joined up and coordinated. Settlements need to be talking to the authorities, and the authorities need to be talking to the settlements, and they need to know who they are talking to. As far as possible, residents must be included in developing COVID-19 responses. The second key thing is that people don't have any electricity in their houses. They are not watching television. We need to get through key information by experts and by the people in charge, and this needs to be done through radio. And it needs to be done in a way that people can gain access to information. And just in Liberia, this Alliance at the moment is supporting a series of radio programs around COVID-19, where they put experts and government officials on the radio who can then answer questions directly from the community. So the second point is communication is key. You have to have proper, well-resourced communication strategy nationally and in every city. The third point is that within the communities, you need to have people who are credible, who can provide information on the ground, and who are equipped with the equipment to do that, and who have materials with key messages that they can circulate. So the very first strategy that needs to be put in place is one about dialogue, communication, and information. The second strategy that we need to be put in place is that we need to mobilize communities and their capacities. Now, I'm based in Brussels. I'm talking to you from my house in Brussels. The only role that I have is to stay away and to lock myself inside. But in this context, it's different. We are going to need the mobilization of communities to prepare for the COVID-19. And we're going to need a far more active engagement. Now, the one example I give is that in many slums in Africa, there was more information in the slums about their own demographics and their own information than the other city and than the rest of the city has. For example, that West Point settlement I showed in the first slide, that is a detailed map of the settlement mapped out by the slum dwellers themselves. The two photographs I have on the right, people might not know, but a very famous sort of technology, the social tenure domain model, which is used all over the world to map cities, was first pioneered and developed by slum dwellers in Mbali, Uganda, where they mapped out the slums, and that technology is being used. Secondly, the slide below, in almost all the cities, certainly in many of the cities, there are people who are trained in information, in enumeration, in mapping. This is a fundamental resource. The capacity built over many years must be mobilized to help monitor and gather information about the spread of the virus. There are people out there who can provide the information so we can work out where the hotspots are, etc. We have a resource. When we can also talk about mobilizing the community to make masks, mobilizing the community to make soap. There are a whole range of things that can be done through the mobilization of the communities. Now, the third point is that the whole strategy of isolation and containment is to flatten the curve to protect the health system. The idea is that you don't want the health system to drown immediately, and so what you do is you lower the curve so that the health system is not overwhelmed. 26% of informal settlements don't even have a clinic. There is not much of a public health system to overwhelm. So the next strategy is we have to have a surge of investment in the public health system. We need to be making sure that the machines are there, the nurses are there, the people are there, and we need to make sure that the land is available if necessary to build clinics, to renovate clinics, etc. So the next strategy is we have to really enhance access to health services. Now, no matter which way you look at this, some people are going to have to be rehoused and reallocated. If you need to build a clinic in a settlement and there's no land, communities are going to have to negotiate what land is best placed, and people will need to be relocated. We need to break the land taboo. This is an emergency. You find the land, you lay out that land, and you create the conditions for a planned settlement of land. And this is not rocket science. Whole towns have been established overnight by organized communities in land invasions. This can be a real partnership if we need to create alternative spaces that are more spread out and less dense. Then this can be done very quickly. All we need to do is make sure that the basic building materials are in place. And this will enable the space needed we'll talk about that just now as well. Finally, we need to scale up. And as I said, we need to scale up around the public health service. We need to scale up water and sanitation services at huge scale. We can do it both by linking to whatever water systems there are. And if there are not water systems, then we're going to have to use other systems, such as bringing in tanker trucks that can fill up tanks in various parts of the city. But you cannot have a strategy that is centered on washing hands if you don't have water and soap. So we need to scale up the WATSAN activities on a multiple fold. The idea that in Monrovia you have a settlement of 80,000 people with no running water simply has to be resolved tomorrow. It can't be that, there's not enough water pressure in the pipe, blah, blah, blah. We have to find a solution to that. And just to say, right now, the Cities Alliance is rolling out quite a large water and sanitation program, but clearly not enough in terms of the scale needed. So resources are going to be needed to really mobilize the scale up of water and sanitation services. So those are the 5 key activities, just to sum up. The first one is really to get the communication and dialogue happening. The second one is to really mobilize and utilize the skills in the community. The third one was to really scale up on the, is to make land available, and then to scale up on the health systems. So if we can get those 5 things done, and if we can make land available and provide places for isolation and for de-densification, whatever, we have a better chance of dealing with the COVID-19 situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Now, if you could remove your presentation, we'll ask Farouk to say a few words. I understand, Farouk, you're on audio only, but the sound was quite good when we tested earlier. So the mic is yours, Farouk.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? Good. Good afternoon. My name is Farouk Braimah from Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much, Mohammed and Julian. I think my work is cut out for me now. I'm speaking basically on a case study in Accra, Ghana. Because of the background of the participants here, I would move straight to what we offer as Slum Dwellers International and the Ghana chapter in this whole fight against COVID-19. But let me quickly set this context in an unusual manner. One of the things I want us to reflect on is that we already have a lot of diseases and challenges that confront humanity. And when you listen to Julian, there is nothing new for the slum dweller. We have always worked in conditions that are life and health threatening. I think the only thing which is new this time about COVID-19 is that it affects both the rich and the poor. It affects both the slum dweller and the non-slum dweller. It affects the politician and the non-politician. The global south and the global north are all affected. And I think that is why we want to place COVID-19 in that context. Let me quickly also say that you would realize that cholera, and I mean cholera, has been killing people for the last 15, 20 years. And in Accra, in 2014, 2015, the cholera deaths was about 240 within 6 to 7 months. Today, COVID-19 is claiming up to 8 lives as of today, and we have a little about 600 and something cases. Now, what is the point? What am I trying to say? All I'm saying is that for those of us who work within this space, we feel strongly that most of the solutions that we're talking about are solutions that are well known when it comes to overall hygiene protection. My question is that why do we think that this time it's going to work? Because it's about hygiene, proper hand washing, using safe sanitation, eating well, taking a rest, avoiding stress, all these protocols that we are hearing. There is nothing new about these protocols. And they have never worked within slums and informal settlements. So we are wondering, how can we provide solutions that would respond to our peculiar needs? So the Ghana Federation of the Urban Poor, with the heat of COVID-19, in Old Fadama with about 120 population, high densities, deficits in water, deficits in sanitation facilities, and the whole place overcrowded. We initiated the Federation's own social support system to take care of just a few families with the support of some funding from XCI and Oxfam Ghana. Now, what worked for us was that we worked in partnership with the city authorities, and we created a certain advantageous position by using the existing data that we have been building in the last 15 or so years. In terms of data, the process has been that you need a certain level of data to be able to target and intervene. And so some data exists in wherever SDI operates, and we are offering our hands that, look, we need to start from a position of evidence and knowledge. And so data becomes very critical in this struggle. The second thing that worked for us was the issues of mapping, and then the structures that existed in community. There were structures already, so we're able to list the community coordinating committees, the community volunteers, the community reporting center, and then we were able to interface with the government efforts. One of the challenges that came up for me, this is the first time I had to face this reality of COVID-19, was a reported case of 2 persons last week in Accra who had contracted COVID-19, and they were living and moving freely in Old Fadama, Accra. Now, what is the challenge? First, they could not self-isolate, which is an impossible to talk of in the slums. So all the protocols that we've been given or served by the WHO and the national governments do not work in our slums. So I had this case in hand with my community leaders. There are 2 people who had COVID-19, and how were we going to respond? This is where the issue of preparing communities to respond and manage COVID-19. After all, we are the first responders, and we are the closest to the problem. And so one of the key points we did was that, how were we going to assist in contact tracing? Because the national efforts, the city efforts could not trace these persons in the slum community. So we've been doing a lot of contact tracing in support of the national efforts. Thank God we were able to identify this person to break the chain of transmission. So I'm making a point of collaboration. There's a need for an interface at the community level that really makes meaning to the national and city efforts. Once we identified them, the second issue was we needed to quarantine them. This lady lived with 3 or 4 others in the same room. She had to share her toilet with 1,000 other people. She had to share her bathhouse with 1,000 other members in the community. And she had to eat among 1,000 other people. What did we do as a federation? The Ghana Federation of Young Poor sought for additional support from Slum Dwellers International and Oxfam Ghana, which has been very useful to us. They provided the needed tools to respond. I think what is lacking currently is that there's a whole lot of urgency and fear and panic, but we are not giving communities the capacity and the tools and the resources to respond. And so when we got this support, we responded. How did we respond? We provided the platform for targeting people living with disabilities. We were talking about people living with mental conditions and pre-existing health exposures. We are talking about the aged in here. We identified them, and in the last 1 week, we have provided over 1,000 breakfasts to these people in the community. These are kinds of interventions that it is very difficult to expect the city or the states to do directly. One other lesson that we learned was that it comes to the issues of equity, need, and participation. The national effort as providing some cushion and relief has been going on in this country. In Ghana, the food, they are providing some water, they are providing free electricity over the period of the lockdown. They are providing some other poverty reduction strategies. But unfortunately for us, the numbers that are being presented, if the states provide food the way they provide, people are going to scramble over the limited food and they are going to pass on the disease. So we have proposed to government of Ghana, our city authorities, to use the existing community structure for not infodemics, the fake news and the fear. Julian mentioned that already. It's a real challenge in the slums. SDI has just responded with the KYC team. We are training about 50 youths or 100 youths in 20 slums to identify fake news so that we can give our communities the accurate and right information to manage and deal with. We need this in communities. There is also the issue of stigmatization. I saw that just last week. Now, how are we dealing with stigma? In the federation context, we are saying that because these people live with us in the community, people are beginning to say, look, it's in COVID and we don't want to sell you. We don't want you to bath with us. We don't want you to us. How did we respond? We to find out, is it possible to scale up water, sanitation, food? I think these are the basic things. Currently, the fight in Accra is not so much of COVID-19, but it's also of hunger. So there are two things to face in the slum. Is the hunger fight, and the second is the COVID-19 fight, together with what happened yesterday in Old Fadama. There was a fire outbreak last week, over 1,000 people lost their shelter. There was a mini.
Farouk, unfortunately, we're losing your audio.
We have to do with the shelter condition. So can you hear?
We cannot hear you very well.
Hello, can you hear me?
That's a bit better. And it might be best if you can wrap up in a minute or so we can move to the Q&A. Yes, if you can wrap up so we can move to the Q&A, and then we'll return with some questions for you.
Okay, so for us in Ghana, three learnings come straight to our mind. I want to share the learning with Ghana and then SDI family. One is that we are saying that there should be a community response and management of COVID-19 going forward. The structures exist, the networks are there, the savings are there, and we need to build more structures to deliver through these networks. Two, we are saying that the deficit in infrastructure is purely the result of what we have today. So we need to scale up resources and support into these settlements and empower them to be able to respond and manage and support the national effort. Third, we are also saying that we have realized that the communication channels that are being used would have to be a bit modified, such that slum dwellers and communities would be able to lead their own communication issues. ICT for development has become very critical for us. Data uses, how do you use ICT to reach out to people in a contactless environment as we find ourselves? I think these lessons and the solutions that we have found, we feel strongly that our needs and needs have a partner in us, and we are presenting ourselves as community and partners who can really provide the kinds of micro interventions that are required at the level in all our cities. Thank you so much for your audience.
Thank you so much, Farouk. We're going to quickly move to the questions, and I'm going to try to summarize a few of the questions that have come up into one. So we heard very clearly from Mohammed, from Farouk about what is happening on the front lines in their communities, and from Julian about what's happening in communities that he's working with, as well as some lessons from Ebola. Critical is this tension between alleviating this short-term need for food immediately, getting things to communities, and getting communities protected from potential cases, and mobilizing the community and creating the adequate infrastructure, in particular water and sanitation and health services, came through very clearly in the messaging. We have a common set of questions, and I'll address these to each of the speakers because they had a bit of nuance in the way the questions were phrased. So Mohammed, for you, what participants would really like to know is, of these solutions that you're hearing, which of them resonate the most with how you would be able to mobilize in your community around you in Lagos? And Farouk, you noted that this is not different, right? That the challenges that are caused because of COVID-19 are common. So with the solutions that you offered, how do you use them to accelerate and then build on these gains in cooperation between city, civil society, and the community, and actually accelerate change? And similarly to you, Julian, the question was really around, this is a very clear solution set. It's also a commonly heard solution set. So how do we use this moment to accelerate and then sustain momentum to make systemic change? Maybe if we can turn to you first, Mohammed, and I'll ask each of you if you can keep the responses to about 2 minutes each. I know these are complex questions, but then that will allow us to have at least one more round of questioning.
Yeah, hello, thank you for having me back. Yeah, I really like the idea of helping to rehabilitate our health centers that are dilapidated and there are no medical equipment in our communities. I would really appreciate if we can get support to help us renovate this our hospital and equip them with the necessary equipment that we might need them in the next few days and weeks to come, because there's no we can't be different from anywhere else. We are getting to the peak and we never started yet. But how we respond now will determine the impact of the infection as we get to our peak, like every other country as well. And we will appreciate test centers to equally possible and food distribution in our communities, not just one-time distribution, but a continuous distribution for as long as the situation goes. And I think if these three areas will be immediately addressed, then the security issue that we are about to go into will be taken care of immediately, and we will be left to deal with how to prevent our communities from the infection of this very virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Farouk, can we turn it back over to you, and then we'll come back to you, Julian.
Okay, thank you. From our experience in the last 3 weeks, one of the key points is that we need to build community structures. And you see, once you have the community structures in place, you are able to lead them into the households. It's about data. How do we mine the existing data that exists in all of these networks and the communities to ensure equity and need-based delivery of services? Governments are doing some deliveries, and we need to assist in the delivery basis. My last has to do with the collaboration between communities, state and national government efforts. We understand the state alone cannot do this. No government can do this alone. But again, we're also saying that we have to increase our resources into these communities to respond effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Julian?
Yeah, you know, the point made by Farouk, that this is nothing new, is absolutely correct. The only thing that's different, I would propose, is that both national governments, city governments, and even the international development partners have never taken the importance of cities in the national economy that seriously. In many parts of Africa, more houses and markets are destroyed than built, as people refuse to recognize the rights of the urban poor in the city and hang on to a model that somehow the world-class city can only be achieved by hiding the urban poor. So this is the moment to say the city is the inclusive city, and we need to make sure that people can survive and thrive in the city. And government now needs to start putting the resources in the immediate short term. Now, obviously, we're up against time. There is an immediate problem at hand. You know, you can't wash your hands in data. You have to have water if you're going to wash your hands. You can't maintain sanitation and hygiene if you don't have the basic facilities. You can't quarantine people you don't have quarantine centers. You can't treat people you don't have clinics, etc. We have a short-term imperative to get things done, which means we have to do things differently. And to do things differently means we have to start saying, if there are national emergencies, then we use those national emergency laws to get things on the ground, so we don't get caught up in the endless red tape that precludes anyone doing anything in informal settlements. Of course, they say, well, if you invest in informal settlement, then you're legalizing illegal. You know, like 70% of Africa's population, city population, are illegal in those terms. So my call for action is really to say that we have to, in the short term, really mobilize a partnership between communities, cities, and national government to get services into the informal settlements. And in the longer run, we've got to make sure that if this happens again, we're better prepared.
Thank you. Julian, I think we have time for one more set of questions. I'd like to shift from the big picture, what you were just talking about, to much more immediate needs. And a lot of people are asking questions about how do you actually practice social distancing in informal settlement? How can community work with local authorities to ensure that they don't communicate the disease to each other faster? And I think an additional question is, how can you maintain community forum, community engagement alongside social distancing? So, Mohammed, Farouk, any any witness account, any good ideas that you've witnessed or you've applied in your work directly in the slum? And Julian, you may have seen also and heard of interesting approaches. And it's easy for us, we're all online, we all have an iPhone, but imagine that that doesn't work in informal settlement. So what are the other options that you have observed and that you would recommend to people working in informal settlement? Thank you very much. Maybe you first, Mohammed, and then Farouk, and then Julian again.
Okay.
Yeah, I will speak on based on my experience working in informal communities for many years. We work directly with people in the grassroots. And if anybody wants to help and support the people in the grassroots, it will be best to work with our organization and organizations like ours that is actively engaged in the grassroots. Because an organization like INF, World Bank, sometimes give their assistance only to the state. And once the money is within this, in the hand of the state, as the evidence right now with some of the relief material that they are sharing, they share it to their political cronies in the community. And their political cronies share those food material to their political caucus members, cutting away the larger population that are not part of their political caucus. So if you really want to bring perspective in our slums and many other slums around the world, you need to work with actual community organizers working within the grassroots to actually reach to the people that really, really need this assistance. I think that is my own suggestion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. On social distancing, when you work in the slum, do you maintain distance? Do you try? What experience do you have in helping communities maintain a certain distance between individuals, or is it totally impossible?
It is totally impossible, considering the huge amount of people that rush after you, and everybody wants to get a share from the relief material. Nobody is patient. We are caught in between controlling the crowd and actually giving the relief material. So after the incident of we being attacked by thought and catering away some of the relief material, we started moving far away and then calling the community leaders within that community and giving them the share of the relief material for their own community and advising them to go and share it by maintaining social distancing. It is only in the first place where we went that we were able to observe social distancing, where we find ourselves confined within a big park with gates. So we were able to allow people to sit down and maintain distance among themselves while we go around and share the material to them. But after that, the rest of the communities we went, it is simply impossible to maintain social distancing and then at the same time provide relief material to the people. It's not possible. So
so I wanted to just thank you, Mohammed, for that answer, and also Julian and Farouk for your extremely compelling presentations tonight. It's my unfortunate duty to start to bring this to a close because we're at time, but I wanted to make a few notes on this presentation. This was by far the most popular speaker series we have ever convened. We had to shut the registration 12 hours before it had, because we had over 1,000 people already registered for this topic. So this is a testament to how important this is and how important all of the messages you've all shared with us. And it's also to say that this is a conversation that is not finished. It's a conversation that needs to continue. And there have been a number of comments expressed in the chats about that and about wanting this to continue. And so we hear that, and we will certainly convene additional sessions about this topic. And we really welcome your continued participation. There were also about 40 over questions in the chat and in the Q&A. We will collect those questions and then we will work with our panelists and with the experts on our teams to answer those and to make those questions and answers available to everyone who registered for this webinar. So again, this is not the end of the conversation, it's a continuing conversation. And I also do want to share that there were a number of expressions of support for the communities here in Nigeria, also in Ghana, over the chat, some people who want to reach out and offer their support. So we will make sure to connect those participants to you, Mohammed and Farouk, as you continue this work. Everyone here is a coalition of the willing. This is a practitioner network and this is a supportive network, and we will continue to make those connections for you. I do want to remind everyone also that this is a weekly series. We will be back here online at the same time next week, and we will be learning from Singapore. We will have two speakers with us, Dr. Jeremy Lim, who is a medical doctor and an advisor to the Center for Livable Cities here, and we'll also have Melissa Kui, who is the CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, and she is responsible for connecting between civil society groups, business, and government. So we'll be having that conversation this week. I hope that many of you will join us again. And I just really, again, wanted to express a sincere thanks to our presenters, in particular for making the time while you are at the same time helping your communities to confront this virus under very, very difficult circumstances. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Farouk and Julian.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
The vagabond king.
Yeah, Mr. Farouk. About your work.
And a huge thank you to the African team from GRCN and for SDI and for Cities Alliance also for facilitating. Thank you all so much.
And Slum Dwellers International.